the first part done to make sure Commissioner Moore could make it. Now we've got to keep on the gas pedal to make sure we get 3 commissioners to an airplane on time. So we're going to keep rolling. Commissioner McNinch, you got it.
Yeah, and kind of the things move kind of fast there at the end. I wanted to take just a couple seconds and just let staff know, Christy and Joanne, if Rob were here, I'd include him, but also with Paul and Tyler here. I really appreciate what staff did on this. It was a very difficult process, a very difficult issue. It's not over with. I guarantee you that. Nothing's going away, but I really appreciate the work that you guys put into this. I know you spent hundreds of hours putting maps together and coordinating and dealing with the phone calls. They were really the front line on a lot of stuff, so they always got the nasty emails and the nasty calls. And I just want to acknowledge that they handled themselves in a very neutral way, at least from what I could tell. They answered questions from both sides. They dealt with things. They got people the information they needed. And I just want to let you know I appreciate it. I think I can speak on behalf of the whole commission when I say that. So thanks.
Thank you for doing that. And I don't know if anybody's had the opportunity to read Joanne's minutes, but they're about as thorough as they get, and they're long because our meetings last a long time, and she didn't miss a word. She put it all in there. And while we're passing out thank yous, Mr. Dankowski, thank you for stepping in and stepping up and helping us through a transition time. I really appreciate it, and thanks for everything you've done. Appreciate it. Okay, now we're going to move on to agenda item number 17, Trapper Education. Teresa Moiola.
Thank you. For the record, Teresa Moiola, Conservation Education Division Administrator for NDOW. I'm bringing before you an item on trapper education today for your possible consideration. Let's see if this remote works. It may prove difficult. There we go. Okay. The Nevada Department of Wildlife is seeking input from the Board of Wildlife Commissioners regarding trapper education. So really I'm here today just to seek your input. And I've put together a list of some, sorry about this, considerations to think about when we're looking at trapper education. So these are NDOW's suggested considerations. The first one is authority. A mandatory trapper education program would require the creation of regulations to establish the authority for such a program. When you're thinking about authority, another thing to consider is who, if anybody, would be exempted from a mandatory trapper education program. The second item to consider is the course objectives and content. So NDOW staff would seek your direction on this course content. Objectives could include things like general trapping practices, trapping ethics, and Nevada-specific regulations. So the question really is the objective to teach students how to trap or simply inform them of Nevada's new or existing trapping regulations? So for course delivery, there are some existing models to consider when looking at how we would deliver a trapper education course. These are a couple of the most common that we see in states that have trapper education programs. The first is an online-only type of model. It would be provided by a vendor. Courses on basic trapper education already exist. For that, we would not be reinventing the wheel. These things teach more of the on how to trap and things like trapper ethics. They, of course, can be customized for Nevada-specific content. This would be things like Nevada's regulations or newly passed regulations. The second model is the instructor-led type of course. These are typically, when we do general hunter ed, provided by NDOW volunteer, so they're volunteer-based programs. In this case, a new program would need to be developed. We do not have existing trapper education courses, and we do not have existing trapper education volunteers. So when considering these different models, these are the two main models. Of course, we'd have to consider how to put these together and what the course costs would be and what it would require in order to make these new programs exist. So if we went with an online-only method, we would be incurring costs for the initial course customization. So we would be working with one of the vendors that have existing content and adding the Nevada-specific things. So that programming cost would be something that the agency would have to deal with. And then, of course, the staff time for that content development. After that, the student typically pays the vendor directly to take the course. This is something we see with people who opt to take general hunter ed, the academic or workbook portion online instead of actually filling out a manual workbook. So they pay the vendor directly to take that. And then in this model, there's minimal ongoing expense to the agency. Now in the second model, having an instructor-led course, again, NDOW would usually do this with volunteers. There's staff time, of course, for initial content development. It would probably be additional staff time because we'd be looking at developing an entire course. For instructor-led courses, there is a state-mandated background check for all volunteers. So that's something that we incur the cost of under current Hunter Ed programs and Angler Ed as well. So if you're a state volunteer and you're dealing with students, there's state-mandated background checks. Then there's the ongoing volunteer recruitment and training. So like we do with current Hunter Ed models, we have an ongoing recruitment process because volunteers do come in and out of the system. New volunteers have to be trained and certified, and existing volunteers are recertified every 2 years. We hold the certification every year, but they have to attend every other year. And then, of course, this is a significant ongoing cost to the agency. Hunter education is funded through PR dollars, and that's how we currently fund our existing hunter education programs. So in conclusion, NDOW staff is seeking direction from the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners whether or not to pursue trapper education. And in addition, we're seeking your input on direction, course content, and delivery.
Okay, any questions or comments? Commissioner Drew?
Teresa, thanks for the presentation. I'm just curious, we do have a pretty good group of volunteer instructors set up for Hunter's Ed.
That is correct.
Is there any reason we couldn't dip from that same pool for this?
Most of our Hunter Ed volunteers are probably pretty specific to hunting. I don't know. In fact, I'm almost certain that we do not have a large core of trappers in that group. They're relatively specific.
And then I know on the Hunter Ed side, there's some online things offered. Do we accept any of that, or do you have to take a class, don't you?
Currently, you have to take a class. So we have a model by which a student completes what we call the academic portion of the class. They can opt to complete that online or via a workbook, and then they go into a in-class what we call like a field portion of the hunter education. And we're looking at a new model, we're piloting a new model whereby if you took the online course, because it's more in depth, each chapter is quizzed and you are tested before you can exit the online course, we're piloting some students into a shorter field day model. But regardless, either way, you do have to take an in-class portion after completing the academic portion.
Okay, any other questions? Commissioner Lane?
Commissioner Drew, I think this was your proposal originally. So I'm looking at this going, general trapping practices. I guess I don't see a need to repeat what the Nevada Trappers Association is already doing. I'm just trying to get some sense of what you were looking for. It seems to me that trapping ethics and specific regulations is what we're attempting to look at. I will say that I do like the idea of online simply because there's a lot of benefit to having the person read and then ask questions and answer the questions. And I think in some respects that would be less of an issue for NDOW, because we're talking about a much smaller number of people than we would be in terms of your hunter education. So I'm just kind of throwing some of those things out there and just trying to get some sense what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think in the committee, it was pretty apparent that the one thing almost everyone could agree on is that more education is going to be helpful to everyone. And so I guess I'd be interested to see what the cabs say, what the Trappers Association has to say on this. But in terms of course objectives, I think our regulations are probably getting more complex by the meeting. And so I think having Nevada-specific content on our regulations is going to be key. I also think in talking with the trappers and actually sitting through some of their discussions on previous committees, I think they do a good job on educating folks in terms of things like non-target and how to avoid that sort of issue. And so I think there's some huge gains that could be made there. But again, I'm kind of interested to see what everyone has to say. It's the one thing that, to me, the committee agreed on. Obviously the devil's going to be in the details here, but.
I remember discussions during the committee that a lot of the stuff that was bringing publicity to trapping and the things that were hitting the newspaper were non-target species being caught, but the non-target species was being caught in an illegal manner. And it was by a novice trapper or somebody that really didn't know better. And it would serve the general public, the trapping community, everybody much better if the novice guy wasn't making those mistakes. That I think that there's people out there that think it would be something they want to pick up. They just don't understand everything that goes along with it. And even if they read the rules, they don't understand it. And they're the ones that, are the skunk in the park, the dog in the park. Multiple of these, it was violations by people that were very new to the activity of trapping, and I think that we could help both sides of this issue by getting more education out there without a doubt.
Right, so if I may, that's one of the things that you would want to look at under authority if you were making a program mandatory, who would be mandated to take it. That's one of the things you'd have to look at, so that authority piece.
Okay, does anybody else have anything? Seeing none, it is listed as an action item. Let's go to public comment and we'll bring it back to the commission. Mr. Sullivan.
There we go. Yeah, as a trapping committee member, I was very supportive of trapper education, also public education, which is a very different program. I'm kind of surprised and disappointed that the public education component of this is not included in the agenda item, but I'd like to discuss that for a second. But first, I'd like to discuss trapper education. I believe in both of them, and they're very distinct programs. Trapper education is done right now vigorously in Nevada, but it's a volunteer program conducted by the Nevada Trapper Association. We had a large get-together a few weeks ago in Ely, Nevada. I think 200 trappers attended. I think there were 70 children, 70 kids, and most of those attended our voluntary trapper education program. We have instructors, we have material, and we have a lot of expertise doing that. So I think this program, finding qualified instructors and having support from the trapping community will not be a problem. We're lucky in Nevada. We have some very, very experienced trappers here, probably some of the best in the West, if I can use that term. We have individuals here that have produced some of the best and modern videos on trapping procedures for bobcats and gray fox. We have individuals in the state who have written books in recent years that are considered, and they are considered foremost authorities on different species. So we have a great deal of expertise to lend to this program. So I think it can be very successful and very beneficial. One of the key things when you teach someone how to trap is not where to trap, but where not to trap. That's a key distinction. That can save a whole lot of trouble if you can get to the newbies and some grizzled old person that's written a book on the subject and everybody looks up to and tells the newcomers, hey, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And you need to do that in person. I don't think the internet program will be very good at all. I think we need that that leadership and that instruction on a personal level. From a personal experience too, if you do an internet course on setting a trap, you're probably not going to be able to set the trap. You probably catch your fingers more often than not. I mean, it's a technical field, very hands-on, and I highly recommend we look at the instructor-led program versus a computer model. So I support it, and I think it brings a host of benefits to everybody. On public education, this is interesting. I'd like to pass out this brochure. I brought enough couples. I found this brochure in Idaho last week, and I'm going to pass this out. I brought enough for the commissioners. I don't have many more than this. It was at a restaurant in Smiley Creek, Nevada. This was not a Fish and Game office, or it's a place the public goes, and the title is Pets and Wildlife Safety. It's about pets and trapping, if I could pass these out.
Just while John's passing those out, I guess to clarify as a member of the committee, we did talk, obviously the agenda item today is specific to trapper education, but we did talk about the promotion of both trapper education and as well as an increased public education campaign on trapping. But with that, John, now that you're back up at the microphone, I guess the one specific question I had for you is the concept of if this class is going to be mandatory, what you see as the mechanism maybe for doing that, whether it would be a first-time trapping license buyer. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say an entry-level requirement, similar to hunting, maybe a grandfather clause. You know, if a person was born before a certain date or has trapped a certain amount of years, us grizzled older trappers, we know the regulations, and I don't think we would get much out of a course, and there'd be kind of resentment to have to go with the newbies and the kids. So I would model it probably after hunting. Have some cutoff date or some kind of grandfather clause for the experienced trappers. Maybe if a person has had trapping licenses 5 years or more, they're exempt, or 2 years or more or something. So really to catch the new entrants. And I can tell you a lot of the experienced trappers, roll their eyes at what they see the newbies doing out there, and in a year or two they have it all figured out, but they do cause some problems. And I think education would nip a lot of that in the bud and be very worthwhile. So would that answer your question? How I would, yeah. On public education, this is interesting. A lot of the Western states have gone to these education programs, both on their websites and these brochure literature, and I think this has the potential to address a lot of the problems we're having in Nevada as well. This is a brochure on how to release a pet caught in a trap. But it also sends a message very clearly in the wording in the very early part of the brochure that if you choose to walk your pet off of a leash on public land, you need to understand this is multiple use. There's a lot of other activities going on that multiple use land. And so if you choose as a pet owner to let your dog off your leash and take off, then you are responsible. It sends that subliminal message. It's an endorsement of the other consumptive uses that are going on public land. These other uses are authorized, they're legal, and they're out there. And then you're sharing that environment with these other users. That's the message it's sending. And it's very practical. If your dog gets caught in a trap, it shows in great detail how to compress the levers of the trap and release the animal. I know we've all heard testimony how when pets are caught, how difficult that is. And with a little public education like this, it shouldn't be difficult to release a dog in a trap if you simply know how to do it. So a couple of very big benefits. This brochure looks like it's printed by a private group called Utah Paws, but it's also clearly endorsed by the Idaho Department of Wildlife and the Utah Fish and Game Department, which has endorsed it on the front page. The contact information for both of those states' wildlife agencies, both email and phone numbers, is clearly depicted, and it requests everyone who has a pet issue with trapping to contact those agencies. So it's clearly endorsed by those departments. I don't think it'd be expensive to Nevada to tag along with this program. I'm willing to bet if we simply contacted them and asked them at the next printing to include Nevada contact information, I have a hunch we might be able to get these brochures free of charge. Again, I found this at a restaurant, Smiley Creek, Nevada. These aren't, hidden away at Fish and Game Department offices where the public probably doesn't go. These are pretty widespread where people do go. And I think the Nevada Trapper Association would be willing to distribute these, in the counties and across the state. So I do not think this program would be expensive, and I do think it'd be very worthwhile. So that's
All right.
what I highly recommend, both the Trapper Education and the public education programs. Jack?
Okay, thank you very much, John. And just, if anybody asks why I let John go more time, is he is a member of the Trapping Committee, and he was involved in a lot of the discussion, so I was very interested in what he had to say, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Come on up, Michelle.
Michelle Spencer, Washoe County Advisory Board. We decided not to take any action on this because we didn't have any support material. And I know Sean Shea did call and ask, and they were like, no, don't worry about it. But I don't want you to think that we want you to take no action because we don't care. We actually care very much, and I'd be willing to volunteer my time for this as well. I don't think that there's many females that trap, so I think especially little girls that I meet at my children's school, they're very interested and they think it's, something cool, something neat. So I don't want you to think that as a CAB that we didn't care. We just didn't feel that we had support material to make a decision. So that was all.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Come on up, Mike.
For the record, I'm Mike Smith from Reno. I appreciate you all being here today. I just have one thing on the public education side of it that Mr. Sullivan recommended. I agree. I think the more information the public can have on trapping, the better. And not just how to release an animal, but all the details of what happens here in Nevada with our trapping. I think the more the public knows. It's one of those old things, be careful what you wish for, but I think that would be a great idea. The more the information out there for the public, the better. And certainly our regulations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Come on up, Paul. And then Paul and then Trish.
For the record, Paul Dixon, Clark Cab. We also did not take action on this, even though it was an action item on your agenda, because there was no backup. And it's very hard for us to deal with in the cab, so I would implore the go-forward commissioners that stay on after you and Mike leave, since you're not going to be here next time, hopefully Chairman Rob, smiling, that we figure out a way when we have action items that we get out something to the cabs, because from an open meeting law perspective, Clark County has always been very, if you don't have backup, you can't take action on it, is the way that things have been ruled with me by the district attorney. And I could look to you, Dag Newton, but that's the advice I've always gotten. So I don't take any action on things that I don't have backup for public to look at other than the agendized item. So you're going to say something, Jack?
Yeah, and for clarification, I believe sometimes we do have items listed as action on the agenda, even though we know there's really nothing going forward on it. But if we list it as informational, it can limit the scope of our conversation and direction we can give to the department going forward. So sometimes, like this item in particular, nothing's really happening today, but we listed it as action. We get public comment through action items. We can give different type of directions to staff in the department through an action item. And we pretty much came in as blind as you did, but it gives us a chance to have the conversation, so then you can take it back to your county advisory board, because there's not going to be a final decision here. This is the start of a process, and I believe there's some confusion on why things are marked action items sometimes, but it does give you a different leeway in the discussion that you can have.
Thanks, appreciate the clarification.
That's my interpretation. My dad's looking at me cross-eyed, but.
It's my natural look. I apologize.
Come on up, Trish.
Did you have a comment remaining for me?
Well, it's just that you're only required to share with the public what you have. So if you don't have any documentation under the open meeting law, there's nothing for you to share, and you can still take action if you feel you have the information to do so.
Then we're going to have discussions with the people down in Clark County.
I'd be happy to join in those discussions.
Thank you.
Okay, come on up, Trish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trish Swain for the record. We're talking about public education, And again, I see a train leaving the station really fast with us not on it. And I think that there are large segments of the public who are not necessarily trapping advocates, who do not necessarily think that trapping is advisable. Therefore, I think they should be represented. If we're planning a course that is promoted by the Department of Wildlife, which is representing all of us, I would hope that our information and our brochures and our point of view would be presented to the public. Thank you very much.
Commissioner McNinch.
Trish, before you walk off, so that's what this process is all about. So what would you want to see in an education program?
Well, just that. Certainly what has been discussed would be worthwhile. Certainly rules and regs. But I also think that we have a lot of literature of our own, not only Trail Safe, but other groups do put out brochures such as being described. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but not only how to release a pet, but also the arguments that are in favor of limiting trapping, or what are the objections to trapping, so that the public is made aware of other philosophies and other points of view. Is that specific enough, or?
Yeah, it helps, and I understand where you're coming from. I mean, if we're going to be telling the public, you know, it's a challenge that we're going to have to deal with, I believe. You know, if we're gonna talk about how to release pets and warning signs and things to be looking for, rules, regulations, I think that's great. If we start getting into, you know, the benefits of trapping, then I understand the point that it's, you know, that there's a side out there that also wants some of the concerns with trapping presented in it. So I think that's something that this board's going to have to deal with and to grapple with, is how far do we want. I think this is very well done, John. I'm glad that you brought it in. It's you know, it just lays it out there. It's just full facts. These are what are out there. Here's some signs. These are what they're typically used for, and here's how you get your pet out of it. And if you have problems, report it. And it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. I don't know if we want to get much deeper in that, but yeah, Trish, that helps.
I appreciate that very much, and we have several brochures that Trail Safe does distribute in all kinds of public events, and it would be very interesting to see what this has and to compare, and there's a lot of good information out there, so I thank you very much for understanding my point.
Thank you. And as far as the train left the station, I think we're still looking for the wheels to put under the train. I mean, we got a long ways to build a locomotive yet to get it going down the track. So who else? Seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the commission. Any further comments, or Commissioner Drew?
I don't know if we need a formal action other than for the members who we know are going to be here going forward. I think this is something we have to move forward with. I just think it makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of gains to be made in terms of some of the issues we've had in the past, and I think it'd be foolish for us to drop the ball on this. So if I'm here in September, I plan on pushing this. If I'm not here in September, I plan on pushing this. So I don't know if we need a formal motion at this point, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around the best way to move forward on this. But I guess I just want to advocate for moving the ball.
Commissioner Lane?
It seems to me that, you know, I guess it depends on whether the Trapping Regulation Committee is going to be still in operation or not. I'm not sure if we want the commission to, you know, to answer some of these questions or deal with the nitty-gritty of some of this stuff, or we're, you know, expecting the Trappers Association and Trail Safe to get together with the education component of NDOW and talk about some of these issues. But I think there are other issues, like the whole idea of reporting incidents, you know, which we still haven't dealt with if we're going to do something like this. And I still think that we, you know, I understand the whole issue of how to set a trap being important to do in person. I mean, you know, we had the same issue with feral cat trapping. But I'm just trying to look at some online portion in terms of regulations and reporting, because, you know, I understand that people don't have a ton of time either. That's what I'm trying to deal with, is that how do we do this and try to make it convenient for people as well. So, I think if we can use hunter education in some respects to look at what's worked in the past and try to apply that same model to this particular portion of it. And again, I would say that trapper education may not just be for trappers necessarily, but for public that wants to understand more about this issue. So, it serves a dual purpose.
Commissioner Wallace?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, too, that I myself came into this kind of cold. I didn't have any information, and this right here, I think, needs to go back out to the cabs, and it'll start some discussion and get some ideas from the cabs. Because right now, we're all seeing this for the first time, and I know I haven't had a lot of time to sit here and think about different ideas or things like that. So I think what I'd like to see is to make sure that the cabs have at least this as something to start their conversation and come up with some ideas on where they'd like to see it go. Because to come up with just our ideas not necessarily going to go there. There's plenty of people out here that are going to have input that may push us in a completely different direction.
Commissioner McNinch?
Yeah, so I guess for me, some of the concepts that I'm interested in better understanding or hearing about, do we want to have a mandatory trap education program? Is that to me is one of the primary steps, is deciding is there going to be a mandatory trapper education course? I'm not sure where I stand on it right now. I can see the value of it, but I also understand that there's it's another program in a sense. So, so I'm curious to hear thoughts on that. The public education, I think that there's certainly something we can do from a public education standpoint, whatever that might be. I don't think that that's horribly difficult. It doesn't require setting anything up. That's just like any other public service announcement type stuff that's sent out or information that's sent out. So I certainly think the public education, but what that might contain is what I'd be interested in hearing about on that side of things. So my thought would be to send it back out to the cabs with the question, the value of a mandatory trapper education course, and what that might look like, along with concepts for information that would go into public